Well, welcome everybody for the Maker's Mark online panel discussion today. I'm Ray Mackay. I'm the Executive Director of the Craft Council of BC, and we're just hosting the panel discussion today. And I will be hopefully I will be being able to answer your questions in the chat. And we will be having a Q&A at the end of the session, which everybody can, if you raise your hand, you'll be able to talk directly to the panelists and ask your questions, or you can put it in the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of or the top of your screen. I'd like to acknowledge that CCBC works on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, for which we are very appreciative. The next person to talk will be Clarissa Long. Now, Clarissa is the curator for this exhibition, a jewelry artist herself. And so I'll pass it over to you, Clarissa.
Great, thank you, Rain. I just wanted to say thank you to the Craft Council of BC for hosting today's virtual artist panel discussion, and then for their continual support of the art jewelry field. Yeah, well, in-person events are always wonderful. I think one of the best parts about being able to host these events virtually is that anyone from anywhere is able to be a part of them. So thank you to all of you, wherever you currently are, for taking the time to join us today. As Rain mentioned, for those of you who might not know me, my name is Clarissa Long, and I am the curator of the Maker's Mark exhibition, which is currently on view at the Burrard Arts Foundation Gallery. Back in April, when Andrea Valentine, who is the acting director of the gallery, reached out to me with her interest in hosting an art jewelry exhibition in their space, she asked if I'd be interested in curating the show, and I said absolutely yes, without any hesitation, despite having a 5-week-old baby literally lying in my lap. When I think back on that now, maybe how quickly I answered had a little to do with some sleep deprivation, but mostly it was because I get really, really excited about introducing contemporary art jewelry to new audiences. And that was exactly the opportunity that the Burrard Arts Foundation was offering. So for those of you who have not had a chance to see the show, first of all, I encourage you to go see it. But for those of you who might not be able to for geographical reasons, the Maker's Mark is a group exhibition featuring 7 women jewelry artists, all from British Columbia. The exhibition explores mark making through material manipulation and process-based work, and how this develops into an artist's signature style. As the artists were being selected, the concept for the show grew from my fascination with comparing and contrasting the artist's work with one another. I became interested in seeing the connections of their work through their uses of comparable materials, techniques, or concepts, while recognizing how their diverse interpretations distinguish the work from one another. Of those 7 artists, we have 4 with us today who will share insight into how their environmental and material influences mark their work. For today's discussion, I have shared several questions that I posed to the artists, and we'll hear from each of them. Then we'll have an opportunity for the artists to ask each other questions, and finally, we'll open it up to an audience Q&A. At any point during the discussion, though, if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat box, and we'll try to answer on the go, particularly if it's relevant to what we're currently chatting about. So to start off, we'll have the artists share a little introduction about themselves. Joining us today are Morgan Asoff, Bridget Catchpole, Jamie Kruger, and Jan Smith. And for simplicity's sake, we'll just start off alphabetically. So Morgan, welcome.
Hi, Morgan Asoff. I'm from Northern BC, Tsimshian Nation. I've been goldsmithing for quite a long time now. I guess I graduated in 2012. And yeah, I'm sort of multimedia. So as you can see in the photos, obviously I work in, I like oxidized silver a lot. There's a lot of the pieces we showed in this one, hollow building, soldering. I work with soldering gold and silver. I also do gem setting and engraving. And other than that, I also work in some other forms like wood and fashion and stuff, but it's a basic, basic layout of me.
And hello, I'm Bridget Catchpole. I am a studio jeweler. I did my initial training I think I graduated in 94, and then went on to art school. And then from there, I was able to combine my love of creating beautiful jewelry objects, but with non-traditional materials. And then that led me in around 2009 to start really looking at materials that are non-traditional to jewelry. So plastics that's either not recyclable, or alternately, I started looking at the plastics in our oceans. And being located near Vancouver, my partner and I went out to the Pacific Rim National Park to start collecting, not realizing how much of an impact that was going to have on my work. And so since then, so 2009, I've been working with a lot of plastics that are washed ashore. And that's really my key thing.
Hi, my name is Jamie Kruger, and I am a jewelry artist and art educator out of Golden, British Columbia. So kind of the other side, the side closer to Alberta. I have been working with jewelry since about 2004, but was self-taught up until for about the first 15 years, and actually come from a background that focused on environmental and avalanche science before I decided to make the big change and go back to study art at the Alberta University of the Arts. So I did a BFA there, and then a master's in Oslo, Norway, which was where I was really opened up into using different materials to portray kind of a classic narrative of the human interaction with nature and the relationships built within that.
Hi, I'm Jan Smith. I can beat Bridget. I graduated 81 with a BFA from NESCAD. And in 2000, I moved for work reasons for my husband to the States, where I made the transition into art jewelry. I managed to talk myself into working for an artist who I met at a talk at the University of Washington and learned about enameling and electroforming. And I ended up going as her studio assistant to Penland. And I've been working in the field of art jewelry ever since. I combine it with paper and printmaking. I live on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people on Salt Spring Island. I was born and raised in Vancouver. My work is very much informed by the environment that I live in. And I helped found the Vancouver Metal Arts Guild. I'm very involved in community work in that way and promoting the field of art jewelry. And I'm honored and thrilled to work closely with Clarissa on a lot of exhibitions and with CCBC. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you. We're in great company here today. So let's just jump into it. The first question that I posed to the artist was just whether you could speak a bit about the works that you have in the Maker's Mark exhibition. So for some of you, you created brand new bodies of work, particularly for this exhibition. For some, we were using some work that was already created that worked really well with the theme of the show. But maybe you could all just describe a little bit of the work that is currently being exhibited. And we'll just keep going alphabet. I know it'll kind of get the same order, but it might just be easier to do that way. So we'll start with you, Morgan.
Okay, so yeah, the pieces in the show, I was actually glad that they were chosen because I've done a lot of sort of newer pieces, and these pieces I both did quite a while ago. I think the dates on them were like 2014, around there. I'm guesstimating. I know I've written it down somewhere. But yeah, basically like the Land Otter Man piece with the gold and the fur, it actually hasn't been shown since back then. So it was shown at the Bill Reed Erotica show back in 2014 or 2015, and it's just been sitting in my collector's drawer basically. So it's really nice to see that piece again. And I think that piece and the other two really worked together really well because at that time I was doing some very like sort of thin hollow building. Like the pieces themselves weren't super like I don't know how to explain, the depth on them isn't super crazy, which I think is actually really nice. They're very like sort of streamlined and subtle in a lot of ways. And then also just being able to sort of like look at the engraving that went into that and like the multiple forms of materials. At that time, I was doing collections basically all with handmade chain. So that's sort of another interesting thing to look at with those pieces. A lot of texture, like with the oxidization, it's interesting the sort of shadows you get. It's a little bit different than with something that's, say, partially high polished, partially oxidized. With full oxidization, you get to sort of focus on those textures and just changes in the color of the black itself, which is interesting to me. So yeah, these are pieces that were, for me, were really nice to see them shown. I haven't seen them shown in a very long time, and I think it's definitely worth it to bring those pieces out again, because they're sort of really different from a lot of my other collections that I've done since then. And then, yeah, we also used some of the photos from Royal Portrait, which I thought went really nicely in the gallery as well. And that's sort of part of, I guess, sort of bringing in the other side of my cultural work, because obviously all these pieces have like cultural base in them, and sort of like showing like the activism side, where these are people that do a lot of work for our communities, and so like honoring them through your work in jewelry. So that was kind of like been my challenge over the years, is to sort of move out of my headspace of like making my little things and expanding that into sort of bigger statements that that can come across in a totally different way than say a piece of jewelry might on the wall for somebody. So
Thanks, Morgan. Yeah, I checked back. The pieces were 2013, so it's great to see them again. And Bridget.
Yeah, so similarly, in looking in the space, I was wanting to work with pieces. Yes, I tend to do big pieces that you that are large jewelry, wearable jewelry pieces. But when you and Andrea and I spoke about the space at the Burrard Arts Foundation, it was, you know, that was pivotal in what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a very large impact kind of wall jewelry, I guess, that perhaps only a giant could wear. But in part due to the space that I was given, but also in part, I find that my work is often getting larger. I think in part because the problem of marine plastic and climate change isn't getting any better or any smaller. So I tend to keep working bigger. It's also in part because I've collected so much plastic over the years that I couldn't possibly make enough jewelry to deal with the quantity of materials that I have. And it's, again, it's not getting any smaller, so I am working bigger. So it was amazing to be able to use this space. I actually kind of in my mind had a thought that the walls were even higher, and I had a whole extension necklace to go to make it, you know, like 12 feet rather than how it is now, which is already large. So that was my new piece that I did for this show specifically. And so there's 7 buoys. 2 are Japanese floats, which I don't collect. I've never actually found one that big. I found a couple of small ones, but they're really quite rare. And so I did source those, but the rest is all plastics that I've collected, including the rope, including the hooks, including the chain, which is, they're called loggers jewels, and they're actually for tying up logs on a log boom. But it looks like a bracelet. I mean, everybody, all the jewelers out there know what a toggle bracelet, you know, a toggle clasp looks like. And when I sourced those from a friend on Hornby Island, it was like, this is amazing. This is totally, yeah. So that's how that came to be. And then the other 2 pieces are brooches from a series that I was doing with a lot of knots, rope knots, and then the sterling silver is plated gold. It's like playing with that worth and hierarchy of materials, and just imbuing the things that I find and treating them as gems.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bridget. Yeah, one of the things that was so amazing about having this exhibit be at the Broward Arts Foundation was the amount of space that we were granted. So it suited the work that you created for the show perfectly. And another thing that Louise and I were talking about when she was doing her exhibition review was that the Bath Gallery, because they sort of come from a visual arts background, they were very happy to let us have free reign of the space and weren't as worried about needing to fill the space. So we find, or I find sometimes in, particularly in jewelry exhibits, because the work is smaller scale, there's this desire to really want to fill up the walls so that there's enough to look at. But I find that with jewelry, because it is smaller and it is so much more intimate, having that space to work around and really getting close to the work and have some breathing room in between becomes really important. Perfect. We'll move on to you, Jamie.
Yeah, the entire collection of work that I have in this exhibition, I made specifically for the exhibition. It was a great excuse to do so. With teaching a lot lately, I haven't had a ton of time to really dedicate to building new work in real art jewelry format. So it was pretty fun to be able to work on that exclusively. And at first I was really hung up on the theme and maybe thinking about it a little too literally, and realizing that I really have no, like in a traditional sense, a maker's mark would be like the stamp that a goldsmith might put on their jewelry. And I realized that I rarely even sign my jewelry. And I think, Clarissa, I sent you a photo of the only piece I could find where I put my signature on the back of it. So it actually took me a while to think about how I would approach this theme of the maker's mark. And I don't know what happened, but it eventually struck me that my signature maybe isn't something so literal, and that maybe it's more tied to the materials, the process, and the concepts that I portray in the work, and how I tie all those together. For the longest time, I've mostly been interested in knowledge and the variety of ways that we can acquire it. And I think that's because of this strange background that I've had, where I'm very much, when I was working in the bush, learning on the fly, making do with the things that I had and problem solving my way through it. And I know for sure that it's because of the lessons that I've learned and the stories that have been told to me from my mentors that I very much transfer that into the way that I make art and use the materials that I use, things like wood and enamel, which has its own highs and lows, I guess, and you have to figure out and problem solve your way through that material for sure. A lot of the work in this exhibition, I'm portraying narratives about experiences that I've had in my previous, in the outdoors. And I think that this is maybe just the starting point for exploring this topic even further. And mostly because people's relationships to nature change, and relationships to material and process change, and I think that I can continue building on this collection that I've submitted.
Thanks, Jamie. Jen.
I was really excited about the topic of the show, The Maker's Mark, mostly because my work is so about marks. I'm just totally fascinated, obsessed, I would say, with how there are these little ephemeral moments that just fade in marks in the earth. But there's a bigger concern for me that has been increasing in the last 5 to 6 years, and that is the marks that are happening on the earth that are being caused by climate change. So the work that's in the show, the conical piece, Hollow Sound, is an older piece. It was made for an exhibition that Barbara Cohen curated, and it's the hollow sound is the sound about climate change, our response to climate change. I think, lots of talk, lots of studies, and I just see how rapidly things are changing. I live on the ocean on a little island. The change is gobsmacking. There is no ifs, ands, buts about it. As beautiful as those marks and changes are, and absorbing as they are for me, I'm extremely concerned and frightened, like Bridget is about plastics. So the other pieces have to do with erosion and how the environment is affecting things that we make, and its own, kelp is disappearing. It's in huge, I just got something in my inbox this morning and went, ah. So although I am absorbed, and most of the time I'm looking down and walk into things because I'm so busy staring at the ground or at the bark, I'm not necessarily trying to mimic or copy those things, but rather sort of memorialize them and make you as the viewer or wearer slow down enough to really study those. Because as I go down my driveway and look at those needles and see the paths of things changing, those little subtle things are so intense and they change so rapidly. We need to slow down a bit and look at the things more. And so like Jamie, I think this is just the beginning of work. There were a number of pieces that Andrea and Clarissa didn't select that I'm still working on, and I'm really excited about this body of work.
Jan, we're really excited to see how that body of work evolves. So we'll move on to the next question that I had. When in the creation of the concept for the show, looking at the artists and their work, there was comparisons that I was drawing. So, I mean, Bridget's work and Jessie Gray's work deal with marine plastics, yet the outcomes of their pieces are visually quite different. Both Jamie and Jan, you work with enameling techniques, but again, the results of you using those processes are vastly different. With Morgan, Carmel, Yoshi, there's use of found materials and objects, eagle claws, rusted nails, silicone rubbers, yet when you see the work, there very much so is a distinctive style to the work. So I was wondering what drew you to work with the materials and processes that have now very clearly become your signatures. And we'll start again with Morgan.
I guess for me, a lot of it's natural, working with natural materials. The way that I kind of grew up interacting with, like, I guess the land and the water and stuff, it's like, I always just loved the little tiny things that you find out in the forest and in the river and stuff. And so that's definitely part of it for me, because I do use a lot of natural materials in my work. Like, otter fur, bear claws, and salmon bones. And a lot of that, to me, it's more than just like a natural material. It's something that represents like Indigenous lifestyle. Like, and so it's like, with that, for me, it's creating like an aesthetic that's not based only on our form line art, but that's also based on how we sort of exist and in an everyday space, Yeah, other than that, I guess I'm mostly working with metals and stuff, and that sort of comes from my background with goldsmithing. And I was working in the art form a long time before I went into goldsmithing. So I had already sort of been working with different materials like wood and leather and painting and carving and stuff. And yeah, I went into goldsmithing when I became interested in sort of the way that my mentor Gerald used gold and metal together, and then using the levels to make like different shadows was really interesting to me. So I think I just like a lot of different medias, but yeah, that's what I was attracted to initially.
Thanks, Morgan. Yeah, I would say that that has evolved into your signature. Basically, your signature style is the way that you do marry, traditional goldsmithing techniques with these natural materials that have a huge cultural significance, and how you marry those together. Thank you, Bridget.
Yes. So I would say that what solidified the last certainly 15 years of my work was a trip to Hawaii. And I think you have a clip of this was, so I'll just talk if you can find it. This was a trip in December 2011. Went to Hawaii, the Big Island, went to the southernmost tip, and what was lovely was not seeing so much plastic along the beaches, but if you go off the beaten path, there is a lot. And so we went down to Kale, which is the southernmost tip of the Big Island, and went on a hike just along the coast. And I started seeing more and more what I call confetti, and it's the broken fragments of all colorful plastics. And it was way, way up on along the coast. So on the path that we were, yards and yards away from the ocean. And as soon as we started seeing that, my partner and I, we started walking closer and closer, taking more footpaths down to the coves. And there were coves that were completely embedded with plastics. And it was shocking. This was, so many people, when they find out what I do, talk about the tsunami, the Fukushima explosion, and how the tsunami is what created so much plastic being in our ocean. But it was long before that this has been accumulating. And so seeing these massive amounts of plastics in the coast, it was immeasurable. There was no way that we could possibly ever collect enough. You could just pull back. We would literally pull back the volcanic rocks, and it was just confetti everywhere. And so that was really, so 2011, that was when I decided this is something that I have to really look at in my work. And they became the material that I've been working at ever since. Yeah.
Thanks, Bridget. I don't think that worked when I tried to share it, did it?
No, but that's okay.
No, I think the video is a bit too large. But I just wanted to say that when Bridget sent me the video, it was very impactful to visually see exactly what you're describing. And I think you mentioned that you might be sharing that to your social media. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at the short clip that Bridget's speaking about.
On Clarissa.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll embed the video into the recording, so that we'll be able to see it when we put it up on Vimeo. Okay.
Great.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rain. Great. Thank you, Bridget. We'll move on to Jamie.
I think a big goal in my work that I always try to work towards is to try to connect the material and the process to the concept, and use that to further tell or relate this narrative that I'm usually trying to get across to an audience. And it also, in trying to accomplish that, it lets me use a lot of different materials. Things that crop up quite often would be enamel and hollow form building fabrication. And I find that working with enamel, it allows me to involve a lot of color into the work, which when I think about humans in a natural environment, we're like these little Gore-Tex neon Gore-Tex covered people wandering around in these sometimes stark winter landscapes, and we sort of stand out in a strange sort of way. But there's also something about enamel that, especially when you're trying to make it stick to three-dimensional surfaces, that it's a challenge, like any sort of experience outside at times, and you're often just reacting to what the material's doing on the surface of metal, and problem solving your way through it. There's definitely some highs and lows. Anyone that has enameled and heard that terrible clunk as things fall apart in the kiln, and you know it's all stuck to the bottom. I think it just acts as this perfect sort of metaphor to explain some of the highs and lows that you experience when you're trying to achieve some outdoor objectives, whether it's for work or for fun. Other times I really use a huge variety of materials within this body of work, but also some other things that I haven't shown in this exhibition. Things like beads and sewing them one at a time onto three-dimensional forms. In cases like that, I'm trying to describe the patience it takes to single out individual snow crystals from a 5-meter deep snow profile and look at them and examine them, and the dedication that takes to do when it's -25 outside. Yeah, I tend to get bored quite quickly if I focus on one thing for a long time. So it really allows me to learn about materials in a very broad way by incorporating this into the way that I work. And it keeps me excited about learning new skills and figuring out ways to use it to tell this narrative.
Thanks, Jamie. And Jen.
So my original background is in printmaking, and I have an obsession for paper. And there's stacks of it around my studio. And as a printmaker, I focused on intaglio printmaking, etching. And when we moved to the States and I discovered enameling and electroforming, it was the same kind of magic. When I managed to work for Maria Phillips and work in her studio as an enamelist, the first thing I enameled, I remember jumping around the studio in excitement. I was just completely seduced by the material. I originally worked in transparent enamels. I was just totally sucked in by the luminous, translucent qualities of it. And because I could etch, I did champ-levé work. It was a slam dunk for me. You know, I can etch really well. Hey, I know how to do that. I had no jewelry training really to speak of, except for one evening class at Vancouver Community College prior to beginning enameling. And since then, I've transitioned more into opaque enamels, but I'm using them in a untraditional way, in that I'm using really, really fine mesh enamels, which tend to be the enamels that are discarded, and using them in thin layers. I often heat patina the metal to begin with to get a color on it. And I'm chasing them now rather than etching them. Although I just set up an etching bath again, I'm starting to etch again because of the erosion. So although I'm not telling a literal story, I am telling a story, a little story of my day, my walk, these ephemeral little moments that are so exquisite. And I want to see them, savor them, and realize how precious they are and how rapidly they're changing. I think that's what it's about for me. And like Jamie's mentioned, you know, enamel is a very unpredictable medium, no matter how experienced you are. And I continue to be excited by its capricious nature and and also what I can discover. I continue to learn new things, and that really excites me. Like Jamie, I get a bit bored, so I'm always looking for new ways to push the medium.
There's really something exciting about when you pull that piece out of the kiln and it's ugly, like it does not look like what you expect it to, and then as it cools down, that color just evolves, and it's really quite mind-blowing.
It's transformative,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. So we'll move on to our next question, which I mean, most of you have sort of answered it already because it's sort of inherent to either the materials you choose or your processes. But if you have anything to add to that, the next question was, how does where you come from and your particular environment influence your work?
I just had to think for 1 second because yeah, we did sort of talk about that a bit, but I think it's interesting because like there's the technical side of things where it's like, yes, this is why I was drawn to these materials. There's sort of the more cultural side where it's like for me, working with the crest stories for so long. So like for us, it's not just like an eagle. It's like I'm Eagle Clan, passed around matrilineally. This is where our village site is on the river. It's very like physical, and has to do with our law. So I think that like sort of obsession with like our traditional law and how that acts out today with our people and territories living in like sort of a different world where we're not necessarily in control of everything that we need to be with our territories. So like seeing how the art interacts with the law has been a big one for me. And that's definitely influenced by my like Tsimshian ancestry, because our system was had so much law that was built into the culture. Like a lot of like the dance form was like legally binding, like putting up totem poles was part of like our, like some of them were land ownership poles, right? And some of them were memorial. They're all different. But so the law plays in a great part of that. And I guess sort of finding ways to express that in this current climate has been interesting. And that's where also started to really put me into the space of supporting like activism, and the people that are trying to, I guess the people that are trying to do what I'm doing with the art form, but in more of like a physical space, like people that are out doing MMIW2S work, people who are actively out doing land defense work and water defense work and like fighting against climate change. Like, like for them to have regalia is part of the way that we recognize them as speakers of law and how we help legitimize them in their fight to keep this earth alive, basically. So yeah, I don't know what I think that like my work is definitely influenced by my traditional sort of life, and then also very influenced by the non-traditional side of it, which is like residential schools, climate change, continued oppressions, like, and all those things are just like huge issues for Native people and for everybody. But so yeah, how do I push that really forward in visual ways, and how do I make sure that these people that are out here doing that work are appropriately like honored and legitimized with the art form.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Morgan, do you, with everything that is going on now, do you find that the way that you like source and handle your like materials, has that changed? Do you find that you have to approach it in a different way?
Do you mean like silver and stuff, like goldsmith materials?
No, I meant more of the cultural like materials that you work with.
I do it really traditionally. So like, I actually don't like buy stuff like that. I only we trade and gift. And because like, so for me, most of the people that are trading and gifting with me of materials that I have like that, it's all like people who hunted it themselves. Some of them are family members. And yeah, like we just do it the really traditional way, like, which is like we trade and gift for it. And so for me, like, I do believe that like indigenous practice around hunting and fishing and stuff is really important. And like, we're really careful with how and when we take things and how much we take and stuff, and how we use everything. We follow our protocols around whatever is not used. Like the salmon bones are in like so much of my work, and part of that is all around this tradition that we have, which is like, we always put the salmon bones back in the water. We always put the extra pieces that we hunt and fish back, you know, into the land and the water, so that animals living there and the ecosystem there, it gets that back. But we have a lot of also legends around it that teaches us that protocol. So yeah, like, while I have a lot of issues with sort of like these bigger things that are going on with the environment, I think that it is important for us to continue like with our indigenous traditions. Like, I don't know if we'll be able to do that forever, sadly. I hope that enough people will continue to like sort of fight for this planet to keep existing. But you know, until then, I think it is important to continue traditional lifestyles, because they're the people that are out on the land and territory all the time, which you basically have to be when you're hunting and fishing. You can't just like, you're not going in with a guide. Like you need to know where things are, and things move around. And as the climate changes, like the moose are going further in the mountains, there's a lot of things changing, you know, the temperatures of the rivers changing. So the salmon come at different times now. So yeah, maintaining that connection is like, I think it's really important. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Morgan. And thank you for the work that you're doing outside of your jewelry creation. Bridget.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear you, Morgan, talking about the protocols of putting back into the ocean, because I see that, and I'm doing the antithesis. Like, I am trying to make sure that all plastics get removed from the ocean, and it's heartbreaking to me when I find plastics that's encrusted with mussels that have created this environment for themselves that has floated into shore, and I can't leave them to live in their habitat because the plastic is breaking down and becoming such a huge problem. So there's this constant push pull of life that is using plastics as a means of habitat. And so like, I'm trying to remove as much as I can, but the reason why how the environment has influenced is I did grow up on the coast, and tide pools was a huge part of my existence. That was one of my favorite things to do. And so even in COVID really pushed me to think about, why are we living in Vancouver? And we've now moved to a remote little island off of the coast of Vancouver Island, and it's way closer for me to be able to collect and pick up. And as nurturing as it is to be in the environment, it's also so double-edged, because I'm constantly collecting. I can't seem to go anywhere without collecting a almost full bag of plastics. And yeah, so that's, I mean, the environment is really important. My work has made me leave the city, and it's completely changed my life.
Bridget. Jamie.
I don't think I would have work if it wasn't for where I come from, or the environment that I've found myself in. Living in the mountains and working in the mountains, it has influenced everything in my artistic practice, from, well, as I've mentioned before, like the concept that the work is about, to how I make it through process and material. And even now that I'm spending more time in the city, I find that I can't even clear my brain to think about what I want to make, or what I'd like to research in the future, without, you know, spending some time back in the mountains and giving myself that space to really, you know, consider all the connections and how we fit or don't fit into certain places. I keep thinking, oh, Jamie, you should just, you got to expand and, make some art about something else. But I keep going back to this same topic. And I think that's just where it will stay for quite a while.
Your signature, right, Jamie? Thanks, Jen.
I think my environment is so intricately linked to what I do. Originally the work was more about my garden and gardening, and I was using floral symbology a lot and parts of materials. Anyone who's been to my studio is just gobsmacked by the amount of plant material, these big allium heads or pieces that are all over. I've got drawers and drawers of plant material that I've grown myself or collected on walks. I walk daily. I live on a little road now, and it's, depending, like Bridget, I can't go anywhere without picking up bags of stuff and hauling it back to the studio. A lot of my early work incorporated those found natural materials, and I used them in electroforming, which I'm doing again with the electroformer and the etching. And a bit like Jamie, I think, oh God, I've got to move on to something else. But I'm just fascinated by the marks on the earth where I live. They're just so exquisite. So it's very intricately linked to what I do, my environment. The garden, it's a way of preserving, and canning and preserving as a child were very integral in my lifestyle. I've been doing some workshops for young people here to do with food safety and preservation. So I'm teaching people to can, people who don't know how to, and preserve, and putting things back in, composting, returning it back to the earth.
Thanks, Jan. It's so interesting to hear how essential your current environments are to all of your work. And I think that will lead us into sort of our last question that we'll have, because in respect for time, I do want to open it up so that we can have some questions posed by yourselves and by the other people who are joining us today. And you've sort of answered the questions about challenges in your work sort of in your other answers. So the last question I want to pose to you is, you all come from diverse backgrounds, and you have histories with different methods of making. Why did you end up choosing jewelry as the medium for your art?
Wait, I guess I wasn't on mute. Am I? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Morgan.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that I did choose jewelry as my only art form. So I guess for me, I'm very multimedia based. I chose to go into jewelry because my mentor, he's a German goldsmith, Gerald Mueller. When I saw his work, it was really interesting to me. I had already been, as I said, in Northwest Coast art form in sort of multiple ways previous to that. I had done a fashion design course. I had taken some other, some bronze casting and mold making and other, courses. And also had at that time been doing wood carving and painting. But when I saw Gerald's work, it just really interested me the way that it was built like that. It was so 3D. And, my dad was an engraver in Northwest Coast art and a pole carver for many, many years. So, I was always around that industry. I was like, oh, cool, jewelry, that's how I saw it as. And then when I saw the way that Gerald was doing it, I was like, whoa, like that's like fashion, and I think that's kind of what drew me into it. I had an old love of fashion from when I went to fashion design school when I was like 18, and I wanted to actually see all the art forms that I do. I always knew that I wanted to do more than one because like wood carving, painting, fashion design, jewelry, like to me, I always had a thought of what it could look like in the end if I could sort of master each art form. So it was a long-term goal and I'm still getting there, but it's definitely starting to come together in that way where, like, if you see the photos that are up on the wall at the Burrard Arts, like the clothing is also made by me, things like that. So I'm sort of trying to get to that whole picture, I guess, where it's like, I'm able to make all the parts of a whole visual outfit of regalia, I guess. And a lot of that for me is just like sort of like really honoring like Northwest Coast like royalty. And so yeah, I think as Northwest Coast artists, you're not really like allowed to just do one art form, or the other artists would make fun of you. Like me and my friends always talk about this. We're like, oh, Northwest Coast artists, we have to do jewelry, we have to do design, we got to be good at wood carving, at inlay. You better have some nice regalia, and you got to do feast culture, and you got to participate in everything. So it's just I come from a demanding community, I guess, but we had so much stuff illegal and shut down, and so much over the years that I think we're really like, we push really hard for a culture.
Doing it all. Thanks, Morgan. Bridget.
Jewelry. Why I chose jewelry. It's kind of funny in how I came to it, because it was actually in high school. In order to escape one high school where I was being horribly bullied, I had to take specific classes that they were offering electives at this other high school that was out of my catchment. And one of the courses was art metal. And oh my God, I thought I'd found nirvana. It was incredible. Yes, it was learning to make jewelry using metal, cutting, filing. I became completely obsessed, and I believe it was my 16th birthday. I asked for a polisher and got it. Like it was huge. And so I set up this polishing machine. I had like the clamp bench peg that I clamped to a table in the basement, and I'd get home from school, and being a neurodivergent, I wasn't super interested in the actual other classes. I was really interested in just jewelry. So I'd get home and work on hours. My mom said that when I moved out, the wall in her laundry room was black from polishing, from my polishing debris. But yeah, that's how I essentially got into jewelry, because then he took us on a field trip to VCC, Vancouver Community College, and we got a tour of the year 1 and year 2, and I was like, whoa. And now how I got into contemporary jewelry, that's a whole other story that we don't have time for.
Next time. I can totally picture just young Bridget in the basement
Like,
filing away.
Obsessively polishing. And I don't barely polish anything anymore, but I think I did so much back then that
Had your fill. Thanks, Bridget. Jamie.
Well, very much like Bridget, I came to jewelry quite a few years ago because I needed a set of wedding rings, and I was too cheap to buy them. So I just made them, but not, that I just found working with metals fascinating. And that's where I started. And this idea of being able to see metal as a material that was malleable and you could change the shape of it. It was just something I hadn't considered before, and spent a lot of time exploring that. But I guess now, as working more out of the traditional side of jewelry and into art jewelry, I think it's more because conceptually jewelry represents this idea of value or sentiment that we bring over from the traditional side, and I feel that I can build that into my pieces as a way to connect value and sentiment to place. And just this idea of, well, I guess also traditionally art jewelry often gets talked about in its relationship to the body. And I'm really finding it a fun challenge to try to connect it less from the body, but more to place, and through these objects that could be worn, may not be worn, challenge this idea of tradition, I guess.
Thanks, Jamie. Jan.
Wow, there's just so many reasons. You know, the materiality of it for sure. You know, I had been making prints for a long time and I became less and less interested in actually printing the plate. I just wanted to etch the plate and work on the plate and cut the plate up. And then just around that time, we moved to the States. And as I mentioned before, I stumbled into this lecture at the University of Washington. It was a day-long seminar about art jewelry and met one of the students who was completing her MFA, and her studio was filled with all the things that I filled mine with, all this plant material. But she was making it into metal by this magical process of electroforming and enameling. And it was just like, oh my God, I've got to know how to do that. So the technical side of it totally draws me in. But I think there's a whole dialogue and performance that happens when you put jewelry on and you move it about. It's almost like a performance piece. You know, I think we've all sort of gone up to someone and sort of grabbed at them because we want to have a better look of what they're wearing or talk about what they're wearing. I love how the aspect of it signals things, you know, like you're married or you're an engineer or, you know, the big rock, you've got money or, you know, whatever it is. And when I learned more, I don't think I was really that interested in fine jewelry, but when I was exposed to the more art jewelry and, you know, especially some of the stuff coming out of Holland and Germany, and I just was fascinated by how it was made. I couldn't understand what the materials were sometimes, and that intrigued me so deeply. And I love that quality in my own work, that people don't really know what it's made of. You know, some people think it's flocked, some people think it's powder coated, some people think it's felt from a distance. So, and the aspect of it carrying a meaning and having a sentiment is very important to me as well. And just drawing you in. So there's so many levels that jewelry really works. It's an absolutely perfect language for me to use. And I really don't tire of it, so.
Well, we certainly don't tire of seeing the new works that you create, Jen.
Okay.
Thank you all very much for joining us today to have this discussion. It's been so insightful to hear bits about your background and the methods that you use in your process. I think at this point now, it'd be great to open up to see if we have any questions from anybody who's attending. So if you have any questions, please feel free to add that into the chat box. And at the same time too, I'd love to open it up so that if any of the artists here have questions for each other, feel free to ask away. I'm just going to review the chat and see if any questions have come up.
I've got a quick question while you're checking. Jamie, I've just been recently doing some online teaching and find how much it's really contributed to my practice. Do you want to speak a little bit? Because you do quite a bit of, you know, as an educator. How do you feel that contributes to your practice?
Oh, it's huge. I feel like teaching came to me at exactly the time I needed it. I think anyone who's an artist, and especially maybe even a jeweler, knows that it can be quite lonely. You're working alone in your studio often. Well, in my case, I was too, and being able to work with all the students at AU Arts, it really brings life to my day, and they challenge me, and hopefully I challenge them, and it's a great way. It's kind of like a giant collaboration, you know, being able to expose people to the art jewelry world and what is out there and what you can do with it it's very rewarding. Maybe not when semi trucks hit power poles down your street and knock the power out right before your class starts, but everything else about it has been very rewarding.
Thank you. So we do have a question that has come up from Cindy.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, hi, everybody. It's easier for me to just chat if you don't mind than typing, but first of all, I just want to say thank you to all the artists for your dedication to your work. And speaking about it today, I was really struck by each of you speaking about your relationship to the land in relationship to your work. And it was so diverse and really represents, I think, Clarissa, your strong capacity for putting this exhibition together. And what a beautiful exhibition it is. And I do want to acknowledge how thoughtful and tasteful it is installed. It's a stunning space to walk into. Bath is anyway. And I think you really took advantage of allowing the audience member to really spend time with the work. And I do agree with you. Often jewelry, the decorative arts, is put into a space that's way too busy. And I do come out of the decorative arts, and that idea of, is it the fine arts versus the decorative? And so to have an exhibition at this level of accomplishment that all of you present, accessible in a quote fine arts space, don't we need more of that in Vancouver? I was familiar with two of the artists, both Bridget's work, and I have the great pleasure of wearing some of her pieces. And Jan, I think I've seen your work at the gallery on Dunbar. Is it the Visual Gallery? Yeah. But
Yeah.
then to be introduced to all the others was such a delight for me. So I just want to congratulate you as the curator, Bath for taking it on, and of course, all the artists. And then I do have one question, more practical, and it's for Jamie. So Jamie, I was struck by your work. Isn't it ceramic? Is it is it ceramic? It's all enamel.
Yeah, it's all, I build mostly hollow forms. So sometimes I use chasing and repoussé to build parts of that. And then everything, because it's quite large, I like to lighten it up, I guess, by doing a hollow form.
Oh.
And then it's enameled on the top. Or I also like to work with steel. And so sometimes I just end up painting a lot of the steel. I do sometimes enamel that as well too, but that takes us a new level of patience to to work with that material, those combos of materials.
Well, I have a whole other kind of interpretation to your work now, because I really thought it was ceramic until this moment. So that's really interesting, but I'll leave it at that. And again, as I say, thank you for all your work. And I really enjoyed the panel discussion too.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Cindy, for joining us. And thank you very much for your thoughtful words. Jamie, that's not the first time that I've gotten that feedback. Actually, I've had a few people who have reached out to me and been like, it's not ceramic. So yeah, I think it's so great to have the show, have your pieces in person, and for people to actually get to see them up close and personal. We have one question that has come from Heather. She says, thank you to you all for your compelling stories. And she'd like to ask, what at this moment brings you the greatest joy in your work process? We don't have to do this alphabetical as well. Just jump in, just jump in when you want.
I think it's the process for me. It's definitely the materials. I'm seduced by them. I just love working with them.
And I think for me, it's I have kind of a visual memory of the things that I've collected. It's really hard to organize them and sort them because they're so disparate. And so it's really hard to organize. And when I can find the pieces that I'm thinking of specifically to go into a bigger piece and I find them and they all come together and they've all been collected in different places at different times over years, that's when I'm like, da-da, I saved all of those pieces and here they are, they came together, you know. That's my thing.
Great.
Well, I was waiting for Morgan because it looked like
Yeah.
going to say something. I have two things that bring me joy, and that's just being able to do work like this. Because I think we all know as art jewelers, you have to do a lot of different things to pay the bills, and having the time to build conceptual work is a true pleasure. And then also being able to see my students develop their own style over a period of 4 years. That's monumental for me as a teacher.
Thanks, Jamie. Morgan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just trying to think about what to say there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know, like, on the one hand, it's like, I know that a lot of people, when they look at artwork and what artists do, they think like, oh, they must be having so much fun. But like a lot of the time, it's a lot of hard work and just like being dedicated to the work. And like, I'm also a process lover. Process. I almost like, I find it interesting because like having these pieces up is good. When I have pieces in a show or they come back from being away for a while, I can sort of appreciate what they are. But for me, I live so much inside the process that the finishing of them and them moving on to like a client or a show or wherever, that part, I don't even really see it. You know, I don't even really see what the piece looks like until way later. And I come back and look at it. All I can see is the process. I'm like, I remember this happening there. This was an issue there, that, you know. So it's interesting for me coming back and sort of looking at pieces with not my, process eyes. I really enjoy the process. I don't know what like brings me great joy. Like, I think I like, I do like teaching. I think teaching's like really, really good. Feels good when you're sort of giving back. And yeah, other than that, I'm not too sure. I just do the work. I don't, I just like to do the work.
And I think that's so interesting. Like that's just sort of come up for everybody, is that it's never about really the final piece and what that is. It's sort of, it's your way of working through life, basically, through this method of creating art. And it's all about the process. And then it's sort of, once it's done, it's out there, and that's for people. But for ourselves, it's really about the process and working through that. And then it's also so interesting to hear about how much the community connection is really an essential part of our creating process as well, whether it's through teaching or whether it's through networking with other artists. Great. So we have one. Hi, Monica. Thanks for joining us. She says, thank you for a very inspiring conversation. Can you please speak to how you see art jewelry evolving? How can we involve a wider audience in the field?
Well, if anybody has an answer to that, I need to hear it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I mean, that is the question, right? How do we continue to reach new audiences with this shared love that we have for this art form of art jewelry? I think continuing to look for these opportunities, like exhibiting with the Broad Arts Foundation, which is typically a visual, a traditional visual arts gallery. Continuing to reach for these connections wherever we can. And that can be something as small as, when Andrea and I were in the beginning parts of putting on this exhibition, she'd sort of mentioned at one point, like, I've never worn a brooch before. And that got me so excited. I was like, you've never put on a brooch before? Because something happens when you unpin this piece and you put it on your chest. Like you stand a little straighter, you feel a little bolder, and then you go out there into the world with this portable piece of art, and you're immediately approached and people ask questions and they want to get right in there and they feel an invitation to come in and grab the pin on your shirt. And I think that's just such an exciting experience. So whether, you know, it's bigger picture of getting work into larger galleries, all the way to just having these like little personal conversations with people about, oh, what are you wearing there?
Yeah, I think also what's been really great to hear is that some of the bigger galleries and museums are starting to have collections now of contemporary jewelry, which is a good marker that there is a infiltration finally happening, I guess. Because that's something. But yeah, I mean, also the wearing of it, it's like, oh my God, it feels amazing. And I can't even, it's like a conversation starter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's kind of where I would see it as well, as like, you know, for like my work, I always say like it's like a living thing, you know, and that probably comes a little bit with the way that art interacts with Northwest Coast culture, but I think art interacts with all cultures in that way, kind of like, you know, it should be a living being. It should go live its life. It should, you know, have a life. So go out, and it wants to dance, it wants to be sing to, it wants to go see things, you know. So I always kind of think of them as like living beings, you know, going out there. So I think it's interesting to see, like, you know, when jewelry becomes more, you know, where it's like alive kind of, and people really care for it, and it goes out there and experience new things, meet new people. Just be alive out there, have fun.
I love that, Morgan.
Totally. And even Jan, I have to say, the brooch that you're wearing is it's one of mine from years ago. It's called Greenie with extendable arm. So it's almost like this anthropogenic or anthropomorphic little creature that can come up and down. So it's almost like it's observing the world. So yeah, totally. I totally see that, Morgan. That's awesome.
I think a really important thing, you know, one of my accomplishments is co-founding the Vancouver Metal Arts Association. I just think it's, you know, I'm so proud of that. I'm so excited by the group of people that are involved in it, and the support that we've gotten from the Craft Council of BC and now from BAF. You know, I just think we've made it so much more visible by just, you know, uniting and standing together, you know, and sharing and helping each other. You know, you've got someone to call on those lonely nights or days in your studio. It's just so great when you're like, oh my God, where do I get such and such? Are you going to that? Let's go to that, you know? I just think that aspect of it is really, really positive, and standing around at an opening with everybody wearing art jewelry, it's out and about, whether it's your own or somebody else's, and showing up and supporting each other. I think that's a really positive and important part of our career and making as art jewelry, and finding new people. You know, if we all just bring 2 or 3 friends to an opening, so what if they don't buy your work? If they buy another art jeweler's work, or just get excited about it, that's great. So I think that aspect is a great way to build community.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think building on community within industry is like just a huge you know, support for everybody, and it opens our eyes within even our own niche sort of markets as to what all these different opportunities are. And, you know, it therefore creates more of an ability for us ourselves to work together to sort of like grow things out into new markets and new views of the public and wherever else we want to see it, you know.
Thank you. Yeah. I think also, you know, everybody has sort of said it starts with, you know, our community and branching out from there. So I think I just want to say thank you again to everybody who's joining us. You're a big part of us helping to grow this field and introduce it to new audiences. And I do want to be respectful of time. So I think if there's any last comments that the artists have that they want to share, although they've done lots talking and we have lots that we can walk away and think about after having this discussion. So perhaps to close off, I would just like to thank again the Burrard Arts Foundation, Craft Council of British Columbia, and Vancouver Metal Arts Association for producing the show. It runs until December 17th. The gallery is open Wednesday to Saturday from noon to 5 p.m. If you want any more information on the exhibition and the artists, you can visit the BAF website. And there's also a exhibition review that's published on the Metal Aid Canada website that's written by local artist Louise Crone. Yeah, so thank you again so much for joining us today. I really hope you all have a pleasant and restful Sunday, and look forward to seeing you all at the next art jewelry event, whether it's online or in person.
Thank you, Clarissa. Thank you so much for all your work.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.